Welcome to Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan, where we get it straight. Today's featured guest is Gary Holloway. Good morning, Gary.
Good morning, Linda.
And I'm very excited to have Gary with us. We've got a really good show going on here today, and I'm going to have Gary introduce himself and just tell us what his position is right now, and then we'll get to talking straight.
Great.
Gary, tell us who you are.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, my name's Gary Holloway. I'm the Downtown Program Manager with the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Tell me what that means.
Sure.
Okay, that's a great statement. Like, I'm Linda, I'm the this and this and this, but I don't understand what that means, and I want everybody out there to know what that really means.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have the privilege of working with about 25 different downtown organizations across the state. In my position at the state, we manage different designation programs. One of the programs that we manage is the Downtown Designation Program, which started about 25 years ago, kind of in response to some disinvestment of downtowns and an interest to kind of preserve the historic integrity of our downtowns and be able to look forward into opportunities we have for the future. So as part of that, we created a structure that enabled municipal government to partner with nonprofit organizations. We have a town partnered with a downtown organization. They both worked in tandem together on kind of shared community, goals for their downtown to kind of help make the downtowns more vibrant, to make them more inviting, to kind of support businesses that are downtown. So my job is to work with both, work with the municipality and work with the downtown organizations to help them with their goals. And our goals as a state to make our downtowns even more vibrant and better for the future.
So who selects who the partners are? Is it the town, the city, or is it you?
Yeah. No, it's really up to the municipality to determine, that partnership structure. Mm-hmm. We have requirements for the program. One requirement is the municipality has a nonprofit downtown organization that they've dedicated, that they've said, we are sponsoring this organization. We're going to provide them some financial support. We're going to collaborate with them. And then identify, what is the downtown organization responsible for versus what, town government might be responsible for. So that's the initial partnership. The initial partnership is the town saying, here in the city of Newport, right? Newport Downtown Development.
Right.
This is the organization that we're going to propose to the state that we're going to work with, meeting the requirements of the program moving forward. And that's the initial partnership. It's not the only partnership.
So 2 questions. Is it mandatory that a city or town has a partner?
Yes.
Okay. So that's a state mandate.
Yep.
Okay. And does that partner have to reapply, or does the city or town have the ability to say, well, thank you very much, we're done with you as a partner, we'd like a new partner?
Now, part of the structure in the agreement under the Downtown Designation Program is that they maintain those requirements throughout. To maintain that designation, they have to meet the basic requirements, and one of those requirements is that they have a downtown organization that's separate from the government.
Right.
It's purposely separate so that when the political winds shift, so to speak, you still have an organization with their own board of directors, their own executive director, their own volunteers that can kind of look out for the stakeholders in that community, look out for the business owners, look out for the property owners, and be able to kind of be that steady direction when things may be shifting around them, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So they do have to reapply. The law's changed a little bit under Act 181, and so we're kind of in this in-between zone right now, which some of those new policies will be kind of implemented and changing as we move forward. But how it's traditionally been is for a long time it was a 5-year renewal cycle. So every 5 years, a municipality and the organization would come to what used to be called the Downtown Board, is now called the Community Investment Board. It's changed names, same kind of basic structure. As staff, I would work with that community, on that application. They would submit the application. meeting the requirements of the program, and they would come and present to the Community Investment Board. Here's the things we've accomplished in the last 5 years. Here's some of the challenges that we're facing, and so basically go through that structure. It changed several years ago when municipal plans went from a 5-year to an 8-year cycle.
Right.
We also changed it from a 5-year to an 8-year cycle.
Oh, to match it, okay.
It doesn't exactly match it, but at least it's in the spirit of them changing to how frequent you update your municipal plan. We wanted to not have it quite as frequent, so we shifted it to an 8-year renewal cycle, and we had that in place for about 5 or 6 years, and then there'd be an interim check-in, like a 4-year check-in, a less formal process that then as staff I would propose to the Community Investment Board. Here are the things that have been happening in this community. Here are the challenges. Here are some suggestions to improve the program and whatnot.
So Gary, does the state, because I know, legislators go on boards and commissions, et cetera, and there's always that, conflict of interest, or should they be there politically? Mm-hmm. So does the state allow, or elected officials allowed to be part of these organizations as well?
Like, in other words, can they be part of municipal government or part of state government and be part of a downtown organization? In the past, we've had a couple directors who have served on a select board or a city council, and now most recently, I know we have a mayor in Newport that's serving kind of in a dual role, and we have kind of explored that with we ask folks, this isn't our response, we ask folks to kind of explore that with the Ethics Commission.
Right. The Ethics Commission is going through their own issues right now, so because they're they were given this authority but no enforcement, and now part of that authority is being pulled apart based on, legislature doesn't want it, judiciary doesn't want it, so here you are, so that's kind of wishy-washy.
Going through a little bit of flux as well, right. And so so looking at that, folks go to the Ethics Commission and kind of see, is there a conflict of interest here? And I can say, as my position, I've always, and I think the board, I can speak for the board in this sense too, where we have these issues come up with our board, where just recently we had a boundary amendment with the town of Poultney.
Right, that's right.
And Jamie Lee, who also serves on the Community Investment Board, is also a Planning Commission chair. Right? So is there a conflict of interest for her to sit on a Community Investment Board and be the chair of the Planning Commission? And the answer is no, because in that position, she's recusing herself from any decision-making on that board for that particular...
Provided she recuses herself.
Provided that she recuses herself. Right. And that is our internal policy for the Community Investment Board, for example. And so when I did my staff presentation, I handed it over to Jamie. She puts her Community Planning Commission hat on, and she presents that, and then the board has a discussion. We're both able to answer questions, and then when it comes to a vote, she recuses herself. And that would be the expectation we would have for issues arising at the local level. If an executive director or a staff member also serves on a council, or whether it's mayor, whether it's city council, whether it's a planning commission, that they, if there's a specific vote that's directly related to the organization, that they would be in a position to recuse themselves. Now, there can be lots of things indirectly, and where do you draw the line? But I think you look at kind of the biggest issues. If it's a direct funding issue, then they would have to kind of recuse themselves, or if it's a specific thing. But otherwise, I think that they can. It's Vermont. We have a lot of volunteers who wear a lot of hats in different positions, and so I think we need to be respectful of those. Those ethics and those where we do see conflicts of interest, and as state employees or local municipal officials, I think we all need to kind of take a look at that.
And the hope is that people are going to be as ethical as they possibly can be. I mean, of course, it's going to be like an oops now and then, but the key is, what's the intent?
Yeah.
I mean, that I believe is the issue, is the intent to say, wow, I'm in now, or is the intent to say, I want to do what's appropriate for Vermonters.
That's right. And I can take that a step further, right? And I'll give an example. when our downtown organizations are structuring their board, we like to see kind of a wide range of different types of folks who are on that board. The usual suspects, as you can imagine, are property owners and business
Sure.
owners who obviously have a vested interest in that downtown organization. But we also have banks and insurance companies, and usually we like to see a municipal official, whether it's an appointed person or a staff person, be kind of in an ex officio position.
Yeah, ex officio is entirely different, though. Could you kind of tell our listeners what that means?
Yeah, so having like an ex officio position would be someone who represents an organization. So in this case, it could be an appointed person of a city council or a select board who would serve on a downtown board and have the ability to kind of chime in and provide insight and opinion. But when it came to particular votes, that person is a non-voting member of the board. So the nice thing about having the ex officio is really developing that relationship. And that's a lot of the work that we do, is developing relationships and knowing what's going on. So we don't want an organization to be making decisions without really knowing what is happening within the government. Were you aware that they're working on this as well, or that this potentially could be a concern? And so it's good to have that, the reporting from the downtown organization and the expectation that they go to a city council meeting and present, occasionally what's happening, just as it would be important to have a representative from the city participate, in the board as a non-voting member.
Yeah.
That relationship is really an important part of the work that we do. We don't want things to happen in silos. We want them to happen in tandem and rowing in the same direction, and so everyone knows what's happening together.
So two things, because I'm really listening to every word you're saying here, because this is very important, and I think that it's important that Vermont understands how this works, because there's benefits. I mean, of course, there's going to be some hiccups along the way, but the key here is to, and I don't want to use the word union, but unionize everybody, get everybody together so that there's a benefit for the residents in all different areas, whether it be mental health, whether it be business. I mean, there's so many areas.
Yes.
So you mentioned that one of the criteria is that the municipality must do some type of financing.
Yes.
So is that financing specific? Like, for example, I know in Newport, one of the contracts was that the money had to be used to pay the executive director's salary. It was designated for that specifically.
Yeah.
Is that something that is specific every time, or who decides it, and does that create a conflict right there?
Yeah, no, great question. No, once again, at the state level, we don't dictate what that structure should be, because we believe that each community has a slightly different
and they have their own charters.
They have a different situation. They have a different charter. They have a different financial set of circumstances. So how much that money is, we don't want to set a bar that's not realistic for another community. Right. So it is loosely defined that there's a financial commitment. Is the language we use. There's a financial commitment from the municipality to the downtown organization saying, yes, we are in partnership with you, and we want you to be successful. So sometimes these are brand new organizations, right?
Yeah.
So Hardwick, for example, was a brand new organization. They had been working on for 10 years, kind of the structure part of like, how do we get a downtown organization? How do we get this partnership? And just in the last couple years have been able to get downtown designation so they can reap the benefits. And they had to, as well, set up some kind of a financial structure. And that can change, right? It can be, this is the way it's going to be for the first 3 years, but then it's going to be this after that. So some communities put forward $5,000 or $10,000, and some of direct contribution, like you can use it for whatever you want. you can use it for, the ideal is you use it for staff, because we don't want to see our staff in organizations trying to raise their own salary.
Right.
Like entirely. Like, we'd rather have them spend their time on doing the work that they would, to benefit.
Without the fear that they won't have a position.
Without the fear that they won't have a position, that stress. Can you imagine every day you have to go in and raise your own money for your own salary? So that's having some stability there with the salary of staff is good to see. It does come in different forms, though. Some of our larger communities, like Montpelier and Bennington and Brattleboro and Rutland, for example, have special improvement districts.
I was just going to say that because remember I was the Bennington-Rutland representative, and I'm aware of both Bennington and Rutland's different structures.
Yes, yeah. So it's called different things. It's relatively the same thing. So special improvement districts, or business improvement districts sometimes they're called, or downtown improvement districts. They all serve the same kind of function. Essentially what that is we define a designated downtown boundary, right, that encompasses specific properties within the downtown as part of the designation process.
Okay, and I want to talk about that after.
And we'll come back to the detail of that.
Right.
But imagine that there's a boundary within the downtown district that's defined, and there's a special improvement district that can be adopted by a municipality, by the voters, to have a special assessment of the property that then gets reinvested back into the downtown district. And now what those funds can be used for can be defined very differently. In some cases, on Montpelier, for example, there's a portion of money that just goes directly, X amount of money goes directly to Montpelier Live, and then they use that money to pay for salary, to pay for marketing and events, specific things for the downtown, and then the city uses the other portion for most of the time, capital improvement projects. Fixing the streets up and adding bike lanes and lighting and things of that nature. So that structure isn't all that different. In Bennington or Brattleboro, and Rutland has an entity, the Rutland Redevelopment Authority.
That's right.
Right, that basically is contracted by the city.
They're distinct. They have
they're very
contract.
distinct,
That's right.
and it's very distinct, unique compared to other, except for maybe Burlington that's got CEDO, where we have a specific entity who's contracted with the city to use that funding, and then they collaborate with the Downtown Rutland Partnership, who's a separate entity, who's a downtown organization. So they get some of that special improvement district money to operate. So that's different than a direct appropriation, for example.
And they're really hands-on. They are vibrant. They are actually making it work.
Rutland?
Yes.
Yes.
So that structure for them apparently works.
Yeah.
And they have it down, because I've gone to their meetings and things and seen, them. They roll up their sleeves. That's
Absolutely.
A working group.
It really is.
And that's what you want. You want to see that happen. So if there's X amount of dollars, say, designated for salary, can at any point in time that particular not-for-profit or partner come in and say, we need to change this and make it more broad because we feel there is a conflict of interest, so that they don't lose the designation?
Yeah, and once again, as long as there's a financial contribution, we don't dictate what that structure needs to be.
Right, you don't, but
we
sometimes
don't,
they have a contract.
Right, and so, a lot of times there's an MOU between the downtown organization and the municipality, and sometimes those are, in the Rutland Redevelopment Authority's case, it's a 5-year contract, right? It's more of a contract than an MOU. And then in a lot of times we have, 1 or 2 year MOUs between the organization that get renewed each year. A lot of times they don't change a whole lot, but there are opportunities if they're, sometimes there's an increase that's necessary. And we've seen that in recent years where, downtown directors are being recognized for the work that they do, and they've and we can speak more nationally, but nationally, they've been underpaid. And these are professional staff that are working in nonprofit organizations, and comparatively to other nonprofit organizations across the state, they're well underpaid. And so that's something that we started to see kind of a little bit more, respect to, and starting to see some increases in those salaries to maintain that staff. So we're not seeing a turnover every couple years with staff. We want to see kind of a steady. I think the national average is 3.5 years for a Main Street director in their position before they turn over.
Okay,
and that's an increase of about a year from what it was.
Oh, really? From what it was? It was like a 2-year
pre-COVID, right? Like maybe seven or 8 years ago, it was less than 3 years, and now we're at like 3.5 years, and so we're starting to see a little bit of an increase, but it's still not where we want it to be. We want to see people 5+ years in a position for a lot of reasons.
Consistency as well, because it's impossible to do this type of work in such a short period of time.
This is a long game.
Right. This is a commitment.
It is a commitment.
This is not, oh, hi, put my picture in the paper, look at me. This is roll up your sleeves, get down, and really get out there to the businesses, get out there to the people, and see what you can make happen within the confines of what the obligations and authorities are.
That's right.
So then if somebody needed to change something because they saw a conflict and they had an MOU, they could go back to the municipality and just correct it.
They could make a correction.
And if that correction was made, they just let you know. Is there some kind of oversight? How do you know if these things are being fixed?
Once again, I mean, I work with
to the best.
I work with 24 organizations across the state, and so as a state, we need to be careful to like get into everyone's business.
Right.
Right. So like it isn't necessarily our business to be in their business all the time, but we generally have an open communication with each other, and so if major things to change, we like to be apprised to what's happening. And usually
would it be the municipality or would it be the not-for-profit?
Yeah, so I have a direct relationship with both, but in cases where I request information from organizations from time to time, like can you provide us your annual budget? Can we see your bylaws? Just to kind of like check and monitor what's happening. And I know different organizations have different cycles for when they do things. So it's not like I can do, this time of year, I expect everyone to turn this into me. It doesn't quite work that way.
Okay.
We do have reporting requirements that we expect from folks, but if bylaws are changing with a town, it's going to drastically impact their historic preservation standards, we're going to find out about that, right? Because they're required by law to kind of submit, municipal plans and their zoning bylaws, and so we, at the Department of Housing and Community Development, we get that, and we work with, my colleagues and our partners to kind of, understand what's happening. If there's a red flag that comes up, then we have a conversation about it.
Okay, so that's interesting. So it's kind of not March 15th, your taxes are due, and therefore we're coming in. Okay, this is going to be pretty general, but you do have the oversight.
We do have the oversight.
You do, through communication.
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
And we do have certain things that are due at a specific date. We collect downtown reinvestment statistics, and you might be familiar with that.
I was just going to say that.
And this is something that we collect as a state. I can talk more broadly once again if you want to go. Once we can go in that direction about nationally.
I do want to after we find out a little bit more about you.
Sure. But we collect downtown reinvestment statistics, and folks are probably wondering, what are downtown reinvestment statistics? Why do you collect them? We once again, over time, we want to see kind of trends of the health of our downtowns. And this is not scientific. It could be improved upon. We ask our downtown organizations, once again, to kind of collaborate with their municipality to get certain information. And I'll go through a few of the things that we collect. We want to know, businesses gained and lost in the year, jobs gained and lost in the year, public and private investment. So has a property owner had done significant improvements to a building that is then going to have a positive impact on the community? Was that a facade improvement? Did you add housing? Like, what was kind of the nature of it? We don't get into great detail. We try and keep it at a pretty high level because it's complicated information to collect. Right. So businesses gained and lost, jobs gained and lost, public and private investment. Volunteer hours. People a lot of times underestimate the value in volunteer hours. We want to know, specific to your downtown organization. Not every single organization in town, that would be difficult to probably collect, but at least within your organization, how many volunteer hours do you contribute, and what's the Vermont average for hourly? We add that up, in terms of the value of what that brings. So we collect these statistics from all of our 24 downtowns, and we kind of keep it anonymous. We put it all together, and then we put an annual report that we provide to the legislature and say, what's the value, of the downtown program,
right.
So that we can, as a downtown program, we can also say, what are you doing? Like, how is this having an impact? Now, any given year, like 2020, we'll remember as the year you just kind of put a giant asterisk. That data is going to be less relevant.
Less relevant, yeah.
Or in Montpelier in July, in 2023, when the flood hit, like that data is going to be skewed.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So you need to look at things over time, and so we have data going back many years. The program's been around for 25. We're in our 26th year of the program. We have data not all the way back to 1999, but we have pretty good data back to early 2010s.
Okay, so you take because I know the legislature just loves reports, right? So you testify before them, though, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
they're not just like, hopefully a member of a committee is going to read it. You're going to actually interact with
We're not required annually to provide like a annual report to the legislature specific to the downtown program, but it happens to be that we tend to do it. And, we tend to go in and provide information, whether it's not annually. It's from time to time, we get called in and we have to share that information. Or constituents will be interested. Specific constituents or municipalities. Can you please share that information with us, because we're presenting this, and this will be really helpful information to have. So it's valuable in that sense. And then we feed that information as a requirement. We're part of Main Street America.
I'm going to get into that too.
Okay, and
yeah.
so we report that to Main Street America, as do all the other states who participate. And are members of Main Street America. And that feeds into kind of national data to kind of see trends across the country for specific data points. Like I gave you some of the high level ones.
Okay, so first I want you to tell our listeners.
Yeah.
How did you get to this position?
Sure.
Okay, we know you were born.
Yeah, I'm here.
But from there, something wonderful has happened. So let us know.
Sure. I'm in community planning and revitalization, right, is the work that I'm in. I am not a traditional planner by trade. We do have professional planners on staff. But I kind of came about this work in a roundabout way. It wasn't like I went to school for this and then here I am, right? As many of us, travel different paths to get. As I have a child getting ready to go to college and to see what path they're going to take, it's really fascinating. So I actually started my career in outdoor education, experiential education, which is not probably what you were expecting me to say.
Not at all?
Yeah, right. So I spent 3 or 4 years working in the backcountry of the Southern Appalachian Mountains, leading outdoor education courses, like 3-week, 2-week courses with teenagers in the woods, teaching navigation and teaching whitewater canoeing to mountain climbing. So I kind of thought that was my career path, was I was going to be in, experiential education with teenagers and young adults, leading, adventure trips. And I
saw that movie.
So I spent 4 years of my life in that world, and then it's pretty intense work that you need to find times to take breaks from that work and then go back into it. And I happened to take a long break from that work over the course of a summer, saying I'm going to take the season off, and I moved from the greater Asheville area where I was living to the Pacific Northwest. And so I moved up to Bellingham, Washington, not knowing that I was going to call that my home for 10 years.
Wow.
Nearly 10 years. So I moved out to Bellingham, Washington, with my now wife of many years, and when I got out to Northwest, I found a job, and I thought I was just going to be there for 6 months. So I wasn't finding a permanent thing because I'm going to go back and, go back to my work.
So time management isn't your thing, huh?
Well, it's become my thing, right?
Right.
But this is early in my life, right? Early in my in my 20s, and I spent some time working for REI. Maybe some listeners are familiar with an outdoor company called REI, and I became their special events coordinator, right? And so this is kind of where my path started to change a little bit, because I was now the outward-facing person of an outdoor gear cooperative, national cooperative. And I worked locally with volunteers to do cleanup projects, and we brought educational folks in to do, talk about avalanche, how you're going to, get out of an avalanche, or how you're going to go on a safe backpacking trip.
Like serious safety issues.
Safety issues, right? So I spent some time doing that, but during that time, this is where my life kind of like went for a change, right? I started to realize how much I liked working with communities, and working with, not only working with volunteers, but working with organizations that were doing good for their community. And so that path kind of led me to another relationship that I formed, which ended up becoming a future business partner of mine. I got involved with a downtown revitalization project through an organic grocery store that was operating in downtown Bellingham, Washington. And through that partnership, he was looking to expand his organic grocery store into a much larger facility, but identified a space that was an old Safeway grocery store, so a big,
Safeway,
large,
wow.
15,000 square foot building, but he only needed, a few thousand square feet. And so we needed to look at that business model of like, how do we fill this vacant building? What's the model that's going to work with this organic grocery store? And this is where I got into doing downtown revitalization work through my business.
But I was just going to say, what I'm hearing here is that the whole volunteer and oversight and safety, which is so important for you to continue, but your business learning is what's been pushing you to become the expert in this area.
Right. So I spent, this is going back over 20 years ago when I started my business with the what's called the Bellingham Public Market. So we decided we would create a space that was a community hub. Right, and this is you'll hear this a lot, where we're creating gathering spaces for the community. We're trying to bring the community together. Well, we wanted to do that around the nexus of food. So people were coming in to go grocery shopping, but what are the other things that people like to do when they go grocery shopping? Well, let's have a coffee shop. So we recruited a local coffee shop to open a small, so we started subletting the spaces out. So we created the model where we had a coffee shop, we had a juice bar, we had a sushi stand, we had a pizzeria.
Sold. You said it.
We had a gelato. We had a chocolate. He imported chocolate from Belgium and created his own truffles and gelato business. And then we had some retail. And so we created a food court and kind of retail center called the Bellingham Public Market. And so my job was to work with the architect and work with the builder and actually help design. I didn't design it, but I worked. We laid the space out. As my business partner was running his business, I was leasing the space out. So I leased the market out, and then I did the marketing. I did the early days of Facebook, and I did the social media. We created the marketing plan, and I was the leasing agent, and then I managed the market. And I had to do the customer service, and so I did basically all of it. And we started hiring some people, and so that was my business for several years.
But I like this. I like that whole concept of the food courts. That took over in Manhattan. They were going underneath the Plaza Hotel. They were underneath Citibank.
Right.
They were. I mean, do you think that model only works for the larger cities, or it could be condensed and work for the smaller municipalities or the towns in Vermont as well, if the appropriate space was there for development? I mean, food courts are phenomenal.
Yeah, I think it's scalable. It's possible to create, but it's got to be at a scale that can work. And these are not easy projects to take on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of capital investment.
So you need that private business.
There can be a lot of overhead at the get-go to make the investment in the property to get it to a place where you then can have the business come in to make the improvements that they need, and they're going to have an investment, especially if you're working with restaurants or heavy equipment like a grocery. There's a lot of upfront capital.
Sure.
So, but there are some examples. In Vermont, in the old mill building in Middlebury, for example. I don't know if you've been in there.
I have been.
Since they've redone it.
Yeah.
And it's probably the size of this studio, where you have a kitchen space, or you can go and get wine and olive oil, and you can have a few different vendors sharing a common space. So that model, I think, can work well for Vermont at a smaller scale. Now, if you're talking about 15,000 square feet, that's a challenge.
Sure. Even in a place like Burlington, it's huge, so you'd really have to make sure that it was the go-to place.
Right.
Because we have 4,000 people here. 4,000.
You need the volume of traffic to make it work. So in New York City, Chelsea Market, you're going to have in Chelsea Market, you're going to have enough. There's a lot of great markets in New York City. Or I was just in Philadelphia for the Main Street Conference. And, we were staying. Reading Terminal. If you've ever been in the Reading Terminal, it's 100-year-plus-year-old market. They have anchor tenants in there, and they have, and it's flourishing. But I grew up in that area, and I can tell you back in the 80s that it didn't always flourish. It almost shuttered, during downtimes, and that's a bustling city that was having challenges. And so any community of any size can go through those kind of downturns, and how are they going to sustain having that kind of a space. But the trick is, for the markets, for a public market, they need to have kind of the volume of traffic, not just dependent on tourists either. It needs to be kind of the everyday person's market.
Right.
If you're only dependent on the tourists, then what are you going to do in Vermont? What are you going to do in stick season, or what are you going to do in mud season? You
have to sustain it pretty much all year long.
Correct.
And then it's gravy when the tourists come in. That throws you up, so you so you can identify what your loss leaders are and everything. But it's really good. Keep going.
Yeah. So I was going to lead you to kind of like how I'm here. We have time. We have time, right? So during my time managing the Bellingham public market, I got involved with the local downtown organization because why not? Because that's a downtown organization is helping support businesses and helping collectively trying to bring support us to bring businesses in, people. To let people know that we're here. They're doing some marketing, they're doing some events, they're doing things that are going to naturally benefit us as business owners. And so the Downtown Bellingham Partnership, which still exists today, and I got involved with them. I served on their board, and then quickly, actually within the first year, I became the president of their board. So I was the president of a downtown organization, all of a sudden a business owner. I was the president of a downtown organization.
It's a lot of responsibility.
And it was a lot of responsibility. But they were going through a change too. Like they were going through from a very part-time staff to now they had a full-time director and a part-time marketing staff. So they had kind of just changed and started to kind of grow up a little bit into a more robust organization. And I helped them through a rebranding process, which is, I'm getting older now. They've already gone through another rebranding process probably twice since I left there. That's what happens with organizations. You have to kind of put a refresher.
That's good.
It is good.
Reassess.
Yeah,
and figure it
out. But through that work with the Downtown Bellingham Partnership, I realized kind of the impact that local, downtown organizations can have in a community that's, especially when they have a voice that's not tied to, once again, the political winds that
That's
shift.
The issue, right? Yeah.
Right? It's like if you can have a community economic development person, and many communities should have that staff person, working with the municipality directly, but also to have that, supporting local businesses and like, hey, we don't like the way that, they're doing they're planning for this thing, and they haven't even asked for our input.
Yeah, there needs to be that
You know?
separation of duties, and there needs to be
Yeah.
that input. So, and that's why I'm always concerned about conflicts of interest. You know, on the surface it may look like there's none, but there is
Yeah.
even indirectly. So you just have to be mindful
Right.
of it.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean that it's, you know, something that can't be dealt with. You
Yeah.
just need to be mindful.
You need to be mindful.
And that's the key. But continue. This is fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that work in the Downtown Bellingham Partnership, they, meaning the city, was faced with a lot of really daunting projects. As you can imagine, in some communities in Vermont, we're faced with some pretty daunting kind of projects. And so there in Bellingham, there was, if you've heard of Georgia Pacific was a pulp mill, timber company that processed paper products. Well, there was a giant plant right on Bellingham Bay that had shuttered, closed down most of their operations. They had kind of very part-time operations for a number of years after that. But prior to me moving to town, it was just like smoke kind of blowing up the hill. I moved there. Fortunately, I didn't have that by the time I moved there. I didn't have the smoke blowing into the hill, right? And there's value in it. I don't want to discount the value in having timber products, because we're seeing the impact of that here in the north, in the North Country and NEK, right? But regardless, there was a large property that was vacant now, a beautiful property along the waterfront
that are vacant.
And so while the downtown organization obviously could never take on that kind of a role to kind of see, we had a seat at the table, right? It was important for the business owners and the property owners, what is the long-term plan here? Because is there going to be a disinvestment in this part of downtown as you're looking at the plans on redeveloping the waterfront, right? And so it's important to have a seat at the table, and that's where I realized it was important, from a political standpoint of a nonprofit organization, that you have some political power as a nonprofit organization.
You can't make it without political power,
right? But you need to do it with partnerships. You can't do it by yourself either. And
Nor can you do it with a political leader.
Right.
Because that's dangerous.
That's dangerous.
Okay, so you did it right.
Yeah.
And you assessed it, and you understood the elements that were necessary, and you got that seat at the table.
Yeah, and I was long gone before they really got into redeveloping the property, because you can imagine that was a 20-year project, and I think that I can't remember how many phases they've now completed, and I haven't been back to see in recent years, but. So anyway, doing that, kind of looking at that bigger picture, that I had an opportunity to see that bigger picture now of not just my business that I'm running, or not just this downtown that we're looking at, but we're looking at the wider picture of what's the potential for this community, good or bad, right? I mean, there's always a push and a pull. We want that, we don't want that, and that's always a dance too.
So where'd you go from there? How'd you get here?
Right. So there's one more step before I'm actually in the position I'm in now.
Okay.
So I'm originally from the greater Philadelphia area. I grew up in South Jersey.
Oh, okay.
And so as I had my two children that were born out in the Northwest, we decided to move back to the East Coast.
Make sure their accents were correct.
Make sure they got the proper East Coast accent, right. So born in the Northwest, but now they're East Coast boys. So I started looking for work back on the East Coast, even though we love it there, and I still do very much. Have a heart in the Northwest as well as my adopted place. I was looking for work, and a job opportunity came up in Vineland, New Jersey, which is I grew up literally as a suburb of Philadelphia, 10 minutes from Center City. Vineland is, if you can imagine, Cape May, Atlantic City, Philadelphia.
I know Cape May.
Vineland sits kind of on your way down from Philadelphia to Cape May.
Okay.
You pass Vineland, basically, and you're about 40, half hour from Atlantic City.
I remember when Cape May was nothing, and then how it developed.
It's really changed a lot, right?
Yeah, I know.
So Vineland, being the largest area-wise town in New Jersey, is a very agricultural area. It's kind of the garden of the Garden Belt, of the Garden State, right? It's the garden of the Garden State. They grow a lot of commodity vegetables in that area. So it's a lot of farmland, but they have a historic downtown area. And so the city of Vineland had, through the formation of a downtown improvement not district, but a downtown improvement organization that was working in tandem with the city and working in tandem with a Main Street organization. They acquired a 45,000 square foot building that used to be, this company, J.J. Newberry's, right? Because the city of Newport has a J.J. Newberry's building in it.
Still there.
Right.
The lettering is still there.
So it's, for listeners, I mean, J.J. Newberry's is an old department store. And as the story goes, our department stores, started to close down in the, really in the 80s in our downtown areas as the mall started to take off. And that also relates to the work that we do. We're kind of responding to that sprawl that was happening with the malls, the malls opening up. And so department stores downtown were a thing of the past, except for our major cities, which I was really disappointed when I was in Philadelphia because I forgot my socks and I had to go get a pair of socks. For the next day, and I went to Macy's, and they had just closed what used to be Wanamaker's in downtown Philadelphia, in Center City, Philadelphia.
Oh my goodness, Wanamaker's.
Then it became Macy's, Macy's Day Parade, right? I mean, it's all downtown Philadelphia. They finally closed after 150 years or whatever of operation. Sad to see. But back to Vineland. J.J. Newberry's had closed for a long time, and it was a big dollar store, like a giant dollar store. Well, the city acquired the building because they wanted to help revitalize the downtown, and there was a couple, a bakery had opened up, and there was a deli shop, and there was some things starting to pop up. Well, they took this large building, and they wanted to convert it into a marketplace. Similar to what I was trying to do in Bellingham, Washington. So I was like, this is really interesting. They're trying to do what I just did, but at an even larger, like 4 times bigger than what I had done.
Sure.
2 levels, where the top level goes out to Main Street and the bottom level goes out, graded out to where the parking lot was.
This was a serious.
But the city of Vineland, is it was developed by a wealthy man out of Philadelphia, and when he lined Landis Avenue is the Main Street, really wide street, very wide street with beautiful trees going up and down the long straight grid-like layout. So there
was like just a beautiful district that was being laid out unto itself, its own identity.
Yeah, and in its heyday. The city, like in the 50s and 60s, like Vineland was the place where everyone went shopping. Men's clothing stores, women's clothing stores, it's where you went to get your hair done. It's where you went to the department store. It's where, and so not just from the city of Vineland, but it drew literally from Cape May to Atlantic City, like the entire Bridgeport, the entire southern area, people would drive a half hour, 45 minutes to come to Landis Avenue. And so it was...
Did you feel that it was a big push also because of Atlantic City, because that was so vibrant at the time, that helped?
Well, in the 50s and 60s, Atlantic City was not.
That's right. But I'm saying, but the whole concept of revitalizing Atlantic City and trying to get casinos back there, or did that have nothing to do with it?
It only had to do with it in the sense that Vineland was still a bit like kind of a bedroom community to Atlantic City.
Okay.
So the people who worked in Atlantic City were living there. But I wouldn't say...
So it was more of a housing, like they lived there, they could commute.
They could commute there. Right. That's right. But I wouldn't say as a comparison, no. But I think they're seeing, Vineland was seeing what was happening in areas like where I grew up in Haddon Heights, in Haddonfield, and Collingswood. Collingswood, New Jersey is a good example where there wasn't a lot going on in Collingswood when I was growing up. There was a great place, great deli, and there was a little grocery store, and they had some of these old businesses, but once again, they had shut, in the heyday, it was bustling. And not a lot was going, it was a few places left and maybe a little bit edgy. I'm not sure I want to go down there.
Yeah.
It was a little bit edgy. And then there's, so communities like Vineland, we're seeing those places come back. And people were investing in their property and they're fixing up the building.
And then it starts
and then their neighboring property sees
going.
that they fixed their building up and now my building looks like crap. So I'm going to fix my building, or at least paint it, do something. I'm going to replace the old sign and put a new sign up, and then that attracts a business to want to come in and open up. And so Vineland was going through, before I got there, was starting to go through a little bit of a resurgence, and having some new businesses, some new energy come in, mixed with you know, Brian Lankin and his shoe store, you know, that he took over from his dad, who I think his grandfather started, you know, like 100-year-old, like, you know, women's shoe store is still in operation today. Yeah. It's amazing.
So it wasn't, the intent wasn't to throw out the thriving,
it was to kind of help
them support,
they're
complement
excited.
it.
The business most of them, the businesses that have been there were excited to see this. Very multicultural there, though, you know, right?
Okay,
so
which is a different design unto itself.
Yep. So we had a very eclectic mix, melting pot of different cultures there in Vineland, which was great. You know, we had Puerto Rican, we had Dominicans, and we had Haitians, and you had a very rich, which the food is great, right? You had a lot of good mix of food and culture there because it's a migrant community, right? Because of the farmland. So we brought in a lot of folks originally to come in to work, and then eventually started businesses. And so anyway, stop me if I'm going too long.
No, go on. I want to hear how you got here now.
Okay. All right. So I started. So I worked on the Landis Marketplace, which was a large market that I worked in partnership with the city. The anchor tenant was an Amish market. So the Amish would come in from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and they had one family operated the meat stand, one operated the chicken and the candy shop and the produce. And that was all on the lower level. In the upper level, we leased it out. We had a Louisiana kitchen. We had retail shops. We had a pizzeria. We had a Mexican restaurant. We had a bookstore. So once again, a mix of retail and food.
But was it important as well for the success because there was transportation, ability to get there?
Well, you know, the bus transportation wasn't like you have in other parts of New Jersey. So we didn't have great bus transportation there. There was some. You could get the bus there, but it wasn't like on the hour.
So I would not, if I were a worker, I would not be dependent upon that. I would need my car.
Yeah, a lot of it's still car dependent. And we drew from the greater, you know, mainly 3-county area there in South Jersey. And it was not a 7-day-a-week market. It was primarily a 3-day-a-week market, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and people would come to do their shopping on those days. So anyway, long story short is I helped lease that out and market it, and I was the manager of that market for 4 years. And then I had never intended to really stay in New Jersey. My second tour of New Jersey, I never intended to stay long term. It was a way for me to get back to the East Coast with my family and then explore where we wanted to be. And so we really liked the idea of being up in New England. My mother-in-law lives in New Hampshire, and we decided to come up to New England, but I didn't know what I was going to do. And so there was an opportunity that came up with the state of Vermont because they were hiring someone to manage their downtown program. And so I say that's interesting because now I've run my own business, and I've started 2 markets in 2 different states, and I have a pretty good sense on business and community development and working with Main Streets. I should say too that I spent a dual role there in Vineland for a year, where I was also the executive director of the Main Street organization, Main Street Vineland. I kind of skipped that step.
Kind of a tie-in.
So that was a tie-in there, where I was overseeing that organization as the market had kind of got up and running, and I was actually doing kind of both roles, which was a little nutty for a year there. So the opportunity came up, and I said, I need to apply for this position. It seems perfect. I can now apply my local knowledge that I've been working for 10 years, and I can now look more broadly and work statewide and work with local organizations that are trying to do this work. And so I applied for the job, and that was 11 years ago. So I've been in my position now for 11 years working with the state, overseeing the program.
Well, thank you for accepting it when they offered it to you. So you got there, and now you're on the flip side. Okay, you're inside the administration, right? And you are looking at it with a different lens, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're turning around and saying, okay, so I'm personally accountable on policies and procedures. I also have to figure out which programs will work. Even if my heart wants a program to work, I have to be accountable and identify if it is worth fixing or tell them, oops, sorry, that has to be kind of soul-searching and heartbreaking at the same time. Have you found many in Vermont that you've had to say sorry, or have you found them where you can figure out a way to make them work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think we're faced with that in a rural state in Vermont, where I'm not gonna pick favorites or pick winners or losers necessarily. But I think sometimes
this is just reality.
We grapple with that reality, right? Of like, if this is the center of like where everyone's coming to. I know we all appreciate this, like, but how do we maintain those investments still in these little hamlets and these little villages that they have something, they value it.
Sure.
We value it. But at what point do you, where do you compromise? Like, where do you, there's only so many people in Vermont, there's only so much money to go around.
Right.
So I think it's not picking winners or losers as much as like approaching a community and saying, what's most important for you? Like, if you can't have it all, but you were able to keep, what's the most important thing? And I think looking at places like, like in Albany, where they were able to kind of like, it's important for us to have a gathering space, and they started the Albany General Store.
Okay.
Right? Like, that's important for that community, and so and it's doing well, right? And Craftsbury, they have a general store that's doing really well.
So general stores
are like
it's a great concept.
It's a great concept, and it's not a new concept, right? It's been around forever.
But it works for Vermont.
And the reason it works is because what do we all have in common, right? For the most part, we can work on the internet, we can work remotely, but at some point, you need to be able to have a connection, like a human connection with somebody, and like, that's a great place. It doesn't have to be a general store, it could be a library.
Right, but I'm saying there has to be a unit area where you can go.
Where you can go and you meet up you see your community, like you can meet up for a cup of coffee, or you can get together for a meeting, or you can just bump into each other, and nice to see people.
Right.
So I think libraries and general stores and
libraries can be revitalized for this as well.
Absolutely, and that's a big part of, a lot of our work is helping to revitalize these community spaces. Mm-hmm. So we have the historic tax credit program, for example, that invests money into these spaces,
right.
to help make them either make them continue to work the way they've been working, or in many cases but
it's important, Gary, and tell me if I'm incorrect, please. Though I might not agree that I'm incorrect, but that the towns, the municipalities, the cities have their finances in place. I mean, they need to know what assets they own.
Absolutely.
I mean, if they don't have that in place, then they're just kind of running, from years and years and years of, we're on a council, then it kind of kills everything you're trying to do. So it's not, when new councils or new leaders, mayors, or whoever presidents or select boards come in and they become aggressive, it's not something that is a horrible thing. They're not being aggressive to harm. They're being aggressive to gather the assets, figure out what capital they have, so that you can do these programs.
Yes. Yeah.
And sometimes you just have to change, because the dynamic of the money and the loss leaders is going to push you that way.
Yeah.
So have you found when you're working with the downtown organizations that they have come into conflict that way, or have you found that they work it out?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, yes and yes. I mean, sometimes there's conflict, and sometimes, they're able to work it out. I think you strung on. I want to go back to your first point, though, is like understanding what you have, right? Every community needs to go through a process of like understanding what are our assets.
Right.
What do we have going well for it? And it could be assets such as, a building and business inventory, and like physically what your assets are. Like there's that kind of asset. But then there's also, we're sitting on Lake Memphremagog.
Right.
Like that's a huge asset. Of
course it is.
In Burlington and in the towns around the lake, I mean, they have Lake Champlain. That's a huge asset. In other communities, it might be, access to, let's just say we're in Vermont. We have access to natural beauty and outdoor access, right? So that's one.
That's a given, and it should be taken and used.
Like every community, and it's slightly different depending on which part of the state you're in.
Right, but everybody has it.
Yep.
There's something there of a natural beauty that can be used. And, of course, we have to deal with Act 250 and all of that.
Sure.
That's
and some communities have taken that. They've taken it, like Montpelier has done a lot of work, in terms of just trying to attract people to the region for their, for their mountain bike trails. And Poultney has been doing a lot of this around the Slate Valley trails. Rutland has been doing a lot of this with their marketing over the last 10 years.
Has been just so aggressively moving forward in the right direction. I mean, they are all united.
Right.
I mean, I've seen this. I've been watching, their council. I've been watching their different partnerships, and I've seen, it just changing for the better.
Yeah.
Their arts.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is happening for the people.
It is.
And good for them.
Yeah.
Good
But
for
I think you need to be able to, I think we talk a little bit about transformational strategies in the work I do with with Main Street,
Right.
And it's something that we're trying to educate our communities around a little bit more, and I'll kind of like explain what I mean by transformational strategy is community has assets, right? Once you've kind of gone through you're going through a process that's inclusive. It's not just me and you sitting in a room deciding what we think is important. It's the town. It's the downtown organization.
Yeah, it's votes. It's the people.
It's the businesses. It's the public. It's each town has their own kind of assets, and there should be some kind of a public process, kind of like get out. Let's get it out there. What do we love about our community?
Right.
What do we have going for us? And I know Vermont Council on Rural Development does this work, right?
Right.
They do community visits with communities, and they help them. They've helped facilitate it, and they help pull out and identify some of those kind of goals. Well, out of that, you can identify a transformational strategy that kind of helps you decide, make future decisions.
Almost like meeting with them and doing a small SWOT, like, strength, weakness, opportunity, threat, like not elevator level.
Yeah.
Just tell us,
Right.
and then you can work with them.
But that can help inform future decisions. That it's not to say that you can't do this other thing, but it's trying to point back to like our community has decided that this is the most important thing because it's going to help bring money and jobs and the people of the community really like it and are supportive, and tourists are going to come in, whatever it is.
Right,
I'm not saying
and
that
it should help define the housing needs.
Right.
I mean, everybody, the word housing, but let's push just the buzzwords away right now.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're doing here is saying if this is the economic development, it is going to define what the housing needs, the types, and where they should be, and if it's feasible.
That's right.
That's the key too. Is it feasible?
Is it feasible? And that's it's a tricky place and time we are right now. With costs of things are skyrocketing.
And they will go higher now.
Interest rates are high. Right? So when you're addressing certain things, it's hard to make things pencil out with development projects sometimes. So that's where the state can come in and play a role. That's where we do play a role.
Yeah, let's hear more about this. How do they play a role?
Right. Well, is it more attractive to build kind of a predictable building in a green space that or is it going to be more expensive for me? Like, what's the predictability of me building in a downtown and it's got a brownfield site and I got to do this cleanup and I got to work with this existing building and I got to convert an office building to a housing. Like, how's this going to work? So I think it's important to be able to kind of I wouldn't say level the playing field because I think we're not quite there at leveling, but I think we're trying to narrow the gap.
Narrow the gap.
Is to make things more predictable in building, to make the funding availability for these conversion or historic preservation projects. We have some money, right? We have some brownfield cleanup money. We have some historic tax credit dollars that can go into properties. So there's community development block grants. Like, you're looking at the funding stacks to kind of like bring the cost of development down so we can add some housing and not have it cost $500,000 for a small place to live.
How is the oversight on that? So, they get their brownfield money, et cetera, and then inside the municipality, there has to be the people, the capital, the educated people, experienced people who really don't slack. There has to be oversight there. So how does that work if they don't do their part and it breaks? Who comes in and says, hey, we need to catch it? Is it you, or is it the the select board? I mean, who's supposed to have that real oversight and then connect to make sure that it doesn't fall apart?
On a specific project?
Like if, we didn't get the zoning done properly. Shh, don't tell the state. You have to tell the state. So how is that? How do you catch that? Is there anything, checks and balances out there?
Once again, it's where the regional planning commissions come in. We're talking about municipal plans and zoning. We have professionals, in each region that are there to support. They're the experts to support, some of the volunteers.
The support system is there.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the key.
Yeah.
Is that it's not just, hey, here's some money, good luck.
No.
The support system's still there.
Yeah, it is, and I think that you hit on a point where we do need to look at not every community has the same capacity that another community has, and we have a lot of small towns and villages that have maybe one full-time staff, maybe a part-time staff, and then volunteers that are making decisions around these projects or around this funding, and so we are looking at the state where. We're working on an initiative called VERTA, which is trying to take a look at the structure of our support structure to communities.
Very good.
So we can understand what are the gaps, what's really needed to kind of provide the support to ensure that municipalities have what they need, and the organizations that are helping support them have the resources that they need to be able to provide the services.
That's crucial for it to be successful.
It is.
Good that the VERT is doing this because that is so important.
And we're not necessarily trying to create something new. We're trying to look at the existing framework and structure and how do we make it better?
Right.
Because we've been hearing this for a long time that there's a gap there.
Right, and that's okay. Coming in and putting your kind of, I call it your receivership hat on and saying, we're accountable, we need to do this and we need to fix it, is only going to help.
Right.
The state.
Right.
Okay, it's not like, we're coming in wagging our fingers and saying, oops, you did something wrong.
Right.
And that's always the fear of the people, is that when people come in and they say, oh, they're looking at us. It's okay to be looked at because you want the input.
Yeah,
the key
absolutely.
is just how do we fix it?
Yeah, we have to keep adapting in an ever-changing world, and we can't do things 5 years from COVID the way that we did the 5 years before COVID. Right? We have to do things a little bit differently. We have to be adaptable.
And COVID changed it. COVID undid. Even going back 5 years before, it's entirely different. A wall went up, and it's start again. It's start fresh. It's not, let's go back 5 years and say this worked, because that 5 years has been erased.
Right.
I mean, now it's an entirely, it's like a cancer, and the cancer's over, and now it's start fresh.
Yep.
And so now take me to Philadelphia it was the convention or the Main Street
Now conference?
Yeah, tell me about that. Tell our listeners what that is, and then how it works, how everybody's involved, where you all fit in. Let's learn about this.
Sure. So as I talked previously, the state of Vermont has its own state downtown designation program.
Did you design that? Who designed it? The state?
Well, the legislature approved it. So in '98, the legislature approved, the act that basically created the framework for the downtown designation program.
Yeah.
And
I just want the constituents to understand that because they don't.
Yeah. Well, it's worth mentioning again. Why did the state do this? Why did they create this downtown program in the first place? And as I mentioned, I think it was in response to what was happening nationally.
Correct.
Right. Starting in the late 70s, probably earlier than that, but maybe coming to a boiling point in the late 70s, early 80s, we were seeing kind of the flight of downtowns across the country. You were seeing grocery stores take their small footprint stores and build strip centers.
The malls.
And then you're seeing the shopping districts move to malls or shopping strips, more auto-oriented places. And so that was happening, and coming to a boil, in the late 70s, early 80s. I'll talk from there forward to where we are with the downtown program in Vermont. But in 1980, Main Street America formed. There was a woman called Mary Means who kind of saw what was happening, and she was a historic preservation person, and she was working on specific projects in cities to kind of help ensure that those buildings would be saved, but also seeing what was happening and started to see what was happening in town by town across the country. Realized that there was a real need to be able to form an organization that was going to be there to support the various local initiatives that were happening within a state or across the country.
Okay.
Right? So Main Street America, which is now what it's called, used to be the Main Street Center, it's now called Main Street America, formed to help provide some support to local communities who were like, how do I do this? Well, you've done this before. Oh, you've done this before too. We don't need to keep reinventing the wheel. Each community is different, right?
As it should be.
As it should be.
Right.
We have our unique identity and our own set of circumstances that might be different, but the more you start talking to other people, the more you realize you have in common that you have different. And so the power in the Main Street America network is that I'm tied to, as a state coordinating program for Main Street America that works with 24 organizations. Well, I went down in Philadelphia for a couple days before the Main Street Conference with all my counterparts who are managing the New Jersey program or managing the Louisiana program. So we all come together, a couple times a year to kind of do some professional development and learn from each other and what's happening and help.
To that point,
Yeah.
I am such a strong advocate on getting out there and speaking to the other professionals across the state.
Yeah.
That's how you learn.
Absolutely.
You always bring something back. I know there's always like some people who will turn around and say, oh, well, what's that going to cost us? So you don't have to go. You know what?
Yeah.
That archaic mentality needs to stop, because the leaders need to get out there. They need to share these ideas and bring back the expertise and grow. So I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, but you've done a good point. I mean, we do have to realize that we can't just make decisions in a bubble without realizing what's actually happening. There's something to be learned. Whether you're a small community, well, that's all for big city stuff. Like, that's not for me. Right? No, and that's what people think sometimes, just because the conferences are in big cities, because it's grown from like having a few hundred people at the conference back in the early 80s to now I think we had over 2,000 people at the conference in Philadelphia.
So important.
We have them in the big cities because that's where we can put them up in hotels, and that's, but the conversations that are happening at the conference are very much, yes, the people who are there for the big cities can have the conversations about big city stuff, but the folks who are there from rural states can go to sessions that are more relevant to them. And so I want to make sure I don't get too deep in the weeds just before I give you kind of the viewers kind of a structure of kind of Main Street America. So like I said, we're a state coordinating program of Main Street America, and so we encourage our local programs to then participate as members so that they can have access to some resources that parent organization can provide us. And it can be as simple as templates to bylaws and and budgets and what's the best makeup of my board to how do I do a review of my executive director, to promotions and marketing campaigns, or what do I do when there's a street closure for a year?
Operations.
Real operational stuff. And Main Street operates under what they call a 4-point approach, and it's really at a high level. It's around organization, having a strong backbone organization, because without that you don't have anything.
Right.
Promotions. So everything kind of related to marketing and promotions that you might do for your Main Street. Design, which is kind of the built environment. Beautification and safety and lighting and functioning, facades.
Right.
Design, and then there's economic vitality, and that's kind of like all of that's really nice, but without the people spending money and the businesses making money, you're not going to have that
the real
vibrancy, the real infrastructure.
Of the money. Where's it going to come from, and how is it going to survive?
Right. So you'll see many of our organizations in Vermont will operate under that kind of a 4-committee approach. They're not required to any longer. We've kind of morphed from that as well, but that's still those 4 kind of principles kind of guide our work. And they may have a committee focused on relationships with Canada and doing specific things here, and it's fine. They can have all kinds of different types of committees, but we have that framework. And so over the past several years, we've been able to offer scholarships through, we have a state event that we have every 2 years called the Downtown Historic Preservation Conference, which helps pay for the event. And then any proceeds that we have from that event, we can then put into scholarships to help send local directors, offset some of their costs, because we know it's expensive to go to a national conference. It might cost you a couple $1,000s.
Okay.
They've built it into their budget, or sometimes they haven't. We have a brand new director or a director who hasn't gone before. And so we offer a scholarship to someone who's never been to the Main Street Conference before, so we can open their eyes. This year we had 20 folks from Vermont go, 2 from the state, and then everyone else was from local programs. We had executive directors, we had board members, we had town staff, all went. And I'd say, coming back from that, and it's probably the largest showing that we've had outside of the Boston one, because it was so close a couple years ago. They had the conference in Boston. Probably the largest showing we've had from Vermont. And what I'm hearing from folks is, wow, I got so much out of that. We're going to build this into our budget every year to send our staff and hopefully send a board member too.
Okay.
Because they're realizing, that aha moment. You go and you learn from what other communities are doing, or you're getting inspired, and sometimes coming back with more ideas than you can
you take those ideas and then you put them into your 4 corners of what your project is. I know as a women commissioner, when I go to the national, committees and meetings, it's you come back and you're like, it's vibrant again. And it gets rid of everything that's stale.
Right. That's right.
And that is
once a year,
so
getting out of our
important.
box, stepping out of our box, and kind of getting refreshed, because we can get beaten down a little bit. People coming at us, and sometimes, our executive directors of downtown organizations, sometimes it can be a thankless job because you hear more complaints than you hear thank you sometimes. But it's good to kind of be reminded that the work you're doing is really valuable.
And sometimes you've done the work and you say, wow, I did this. and it's good. It's a good reinforcement, and it's good to know what you can do as well as what you are doing that's working.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And so the other thing I'll say, when I first started working with Main Street America, gosh, it's been a long time. They probably had a half a dozen staff, 15, 20 years ago. They're now a staff of like 45, 50 nationally, and they have people dedicated in Washington, D.C. who are helping follow policy. They have folks who are doing research and data. And so we have people kind of going to bat for us as members of this organization who are giving us very practical, digestible information, so we don't have to get caught with everything going on in D.C. They can say, this is how it's going to impact you. And here's what we can do about it. And so there's been a movement, and there's a lot of strength behind that movement right now to kind of help support from a policy, and then having some data and research that they're helping us with, partly that we're feeding and partly that they're getting from elsewhere. And so that's been really, really helpful. They have a whole Main Street Institute trainings. So I'm hiring Main Street America to come into Vermont to do a training series. Actually, we're starting a webinar series this month.
Okay.
First one is basic. This year's focus is organization.
And who gets to participate in this?
Well, the webinars are open to all of our downtown organizations that are participating in our state program. And we're actually partnering with Maine. Right. And so Maine is also going to be able to participate in our 3-part webinar series. The first one is focused on executive directors. Okay. The first one is focused on Main Street 101. Basic, because we have a lot of new folks and some folks who've been participating and understanding, like, how can I apply what we're doing at Main Street to my community? So we're doing a basic 101 webinar later this month. We're doing an executive director training, like, how can I be the most effective executive director that I can be? What's the magic behind that? And then one focused on boards in August, where we're going to be, July. That'll be our July webinar, where how does a strong board operate? and what's the
Where does it
makeup
fall
of that.
apart? How does it stay together?
Yeah, right.
Right.
So really focusing on that backbone, the organization itself. And so we're inviting, it's a webinar, we're inviting Maine direct participating programs and ARPA programs. And then later this year, we're inviting Main Street America to come in and do an evaluation of our state program.
Beautiful.
Because we've been operating for 26 years and we know we're not perfect. Like, how can we operate better? Like, what are the things that are going well for us? How can we bolster our program more to make us more impactful to our communities that we're serving? Because that's why we're here in the first place, is to have them be stronger. And so that'll be it.
I know that there's that infamous word accreditation running around, and I don't like that word. But but I want you to explain what that really means. It's not like, the educational system where they go through accreditation boards, and I think that that's what's confusing. I suggest you pick a new word, but but I'm just saying, can you explain what that means?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So as a state coordinating program of Main Street America, the Vermont Downtown Program is that entity. We have the ability to recognize our local programs in Vermont, for Vermont, recognize programs that are meeting kind of the highest standards as set by Main Street America. And so I guess it was two years ago, we had all of our organizations, regardless of affiliation with Main Street America or not, we had them all do a self-evaluation. So it was set by Main Street America. There's different criteria in each of the areas, whether it's around historic preservation or your organizational structure and your budgeting and accounting, like everything to do with the organization, like how you function. You're doing a self-analysis. So we had all our organizations do a self-evaluation, and then I went through the self-evaluation, and I provided let's call it a grade because it's common language, but it's not really a grade. It's more, I provided a performance standard as well. You know what, you're kind of harsh on yourself. I'm viewing it this way. I'm actually scoring you a little higher, or well, you think you are doing well, but I think you're not a 5. Like I think you're more of a 4. Like, so I went through the process as well. So we have a local score and a coordinator score. And so what that means as far as accreditation, and I didn't define the name. It's been called that since the beginning when Main Street.
And they have that on all of the
the Main Street accreditation.
Do it. It's
so
just,
what it means.
The word I hear, accreditation, is so literal. So I get it.
I totally get it. What it means is that that organization is meeting the standards as set by Main Street America.
Like a gold standard versus
like a gold
silver standard.
Right.
Okay.
That's right. And if they're like, you're doing a good job, maybe it's an organization that's only been around for 5 years, and they are doing good work. It doesn't mean that they're not doing good work. I want to be clear with that, right?
Yeah.
Just because you're not accredited doesn't mean you're not doing good work. It just means that this is a bar like to strive for, right? Like maybe some areas where you can improve to make your organization stronger and better. So we have affiliate programs as well that are they're just community members of Main Street America who've gone through the evaluation. I don't require all 24 to go through the self-evaluation every year, but if you want to be an affiliate program of Main Street, you do have to go at least through the evaluation process each year. And then I'm looking at it and say, almost there. This year we moved from 4 accredited programs to 7. And we have one affiliate program as well. So we have 8 kind of our 24 that are kind of in that realm. What's the purpose of the accreditation?
Right.
Like what do you get? Like what
a ribbon.
Right. I think part of it is that, like, I would say like half of the reason you do it is just for that. Because you want your organization to be operating at a high level and having that reassurance that you're doing good work.
Well, self-esteem is good.
Self-esteem is good, right? Like, so it helps to have some structure in place so that organizations don't totally fall off the rails. It's for them to kind of, you have boards that turn over, you have directors that turn over. And so like what can be constant for that organization can be this structure of the accreditation, to make sure, even if you have a complete turnover,
how you morph into
how do we know that we're doing a good job? Well, every year we're doing this evaluation that they're going to tell us, right? So like that's part of it, is to keep our organizations healthy.
Okay.
And to raise the bar in the organizations that maybe are struggling, that are trying to do better, that can now. So that's, to me, that's half of it.
Acknowledge the value.
Right. Yeah.
right? Whether the value that's there, the
And you're
value you want to get
recognized.
to, and the value that you need
Right.
to move up into the recognition.
The recognition is,
Right.
I think, you know, I mean,
I still don't
sometimes
like the word
I know.
accreditation.
And I'm not one who, you know, needs recognition all the time, but I think we all
Well,
do
but the
a little bit,
organizations
right?
do.
The organization, the volunteers especially, right? Like
Right.
they need to be, they should be recognized for the work that they're doing.
Right.
So the organization should be recognized for the work that they're doing within Vermont and then nationally recognized. And so that's part of it.
So when they fill this self-evaluation out, do they identify, hey, you know, we have 25 volunteers, we put
Yes.
in all these hours, and we're using our volunteers to capacity, or,
Yes.
you know, we have a lot of people who are volunteering who we just don't have the resources to even have them work. I mean, you get to see all that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, we do require, like, you know, it's a couple years ago they adjusted it so that we have part-time staff and we have full-time staff. Well, if you're a city of a certain size, we expect you to have a full-time staff.
Okay.
If you're a city below a certain, I think it's 5,000 above,
Right,
5,000
okay.
below can have a part-time staff and still meet that and still satisfy that, right?
Okay.
So we do considerations for size is important to kind of think about as
Sure.
well. But yeah, we you know, we have organizations that have hundreds of volunteers, and we have organizations that have 20. You know, it's like, so. But what are you getting accomplished with that? You know, so we do have these metrics. The other part, as it relates to kind of the accolades, is there is a Great American Main Street Award that's awarded to communities each year, and there's usually three to five that are selected each year. We've had one in our existence. We've had one. Burlington was recognized
Right.
years ago for the Great American Main Street Award. We'd like to, in recent times, get one recognized to kind of put Vermont
Back on the map.
and say, because we go to these conferences and they're coming, our directors are coming back saying, we're doing a lot of really amazing work here in Vermont. Like, we should be recognized. And absolutely, we should be.
Right.
You know, so my goal is to help whomever it may be that wants to apply. And usually when you apply, we hear that it takes, you know, it could take you 3 or 4 years before you get, you know, nominated, and then you might not win it. But
Sure.
my goal would be to get one nominated in the next few years. and
How
then
do
if
you
we can
convince them to apply? How do they find out that they should apply?
it's my job.
Your job, okay.
You know, they're also members, so they should be aware. But it's my job to remind them, like, hey, you're doing amazing work. Like, you should consider applying. And I've had some of those conversations with some of our communities. And it is a bit of work to apply, though. It's not like a slam dunk. You know, you're going to have to commit.
And take time away from your work.
Take time away from your work and get it turned in and whatnot. So anyway, that's a goal of ours, to kind of get them recognized, because I think we are doing really good work. And I serve on the leadership committee for Main Street America as well.
Okay.
So I represent. It's kind of broken up into regions of the country, and so if you can think of basically Washington D.C. up to Maine.
Right.
Is the Northeast.
Right.
So me and a colleague from Pennsylvania serve on the leadership council for Main Street America. Each region gets two. There's a sweet tea region. There's the West. There's the South. And so what that means is each of us get together monthly with Main Street staff, so that we can then offer suggestions that what we're hearing from our communities, our regions, we can then feed that up to the national, and then they can feed information to us that we can then, feed out. And
Wow.
then we can kind of collaborate together on, we have several events, like we're going to be in Billings, Montana this fall for our annual coordinators meeting, and so we know we have to organize that, that and
I want to go to Montana.
or look at strategy, like there's a lot of conversation around, climate impacts and disasters impacting Main Streets. And so,
Okay.
how is Main Street responding to that? There's a lot of conversations around that.
Okay.
Right?
Wow, this is great. So I want, Gary, you've been wonderful.
Yeah.
Can you just tell our listeners anything you want now, your wrap up?
Okay. Go shop in your downtowns.
That's right.
No, thanks for having me, Linda. No, I just tell our listeners, our downtowns are fragile right now. Like from an economic standpoint, they're going through a lot of challenges, from competition to online shopping to natural disasters that are impacting to just changing things around. I just say, be willing to volunteer if you love your community. Be willing to roll up your shirt. your sleeves and be willing to, help out in whatever way, whatever your interests are in your community, whether it's, picking up trash to, doing beautification work to, to whatever it might be. And then, go shopping downtown for things that you think you don't need to buy online, because I think that's important. We need to keep our downtowns vibrant, and if we really cherish where we live, we need to support our neighbors who are running those businesses. And so I think that's an important thing to remember.
Wow, this is great. So this has been Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan with a wonderful guest, Gary Holloway, who has talked straight, and I hope to have you back again.
Great.
Thank you. Until the next show.